Okay, I think we're probably at a good place. We've got a critical mass. I think we're ready to get started. I'm pleased to see such a good turnout tonight for this timely topic about being aware and being prepared and learning about the flood warning system that we have in the Chehalis River Basin. I see a number of new names on our attendee list tonight, and I wanted to thank folks who helped spread the word about tonight's webinar, in particular to the Chronicle that shared this in the newspaper, and Lewis County Health and Human Services who spread the word, in addition to some of our regular partners that work on Chehalis Basin strategy efforts. Also wanted to thank Pyramid Communications, who've done a lot of work for us in getting ready for this webinar and some of the others that are in a series that we've been doing. We've had a growing list of webinar topics that have been sponsored by our Chehalis Basin strategy with the help of Pyramid Communications. I'm Andrea McNamara Doyle. I'm the director of the Office of Chehalis Basin and excited to bring this webinar to you this evening. If you want to go ahead and advance to the next slide for me. Tonight, we've got a couple of great speakers here. One is Dr. David Curtis, who is the person who has led and continues to lead the design and implementation and operation and maintenance of the early flood warning system for the Chehalis River in Western Washington. You're also going to be hearing tonight from Scott Betcher, who is staff to the Chehalis River Basin Flood Authority, who coordinates with many of the local governments in the Chehalis River Basin. Before I give more about tonight's presentation, though, I want to turn things over very quickly to Casey Hart, the very capable and considerate Casey, who helps us run these webinars, and she'll give you some Zoom announcements and tech support.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. My name is Casey, and just a couple Zoom technical information. All attendees here will be muted. The chat function is disabled, and if you have any technical difficulties, you can reach out to me at chart@rawstrategic.com. At the bottom of the screen, there's the live transcripts that you can enable on the bottom panel, as well as the Spanish interpretation with the interpretation setting. And we will have time for question and answer. The box is live at all time for you to input your questions and like them if you have the same question as somebody else. All attendees can submit questions anonymously, and there will be designated times for these questions to be answered. At the end, we will allow you to raise your hands if we have time for that. The chat feature and raise hand feature is currently disabled. So thanks, and back to you.
Thanks, Casey. So just a couple more bits of introduction before we turn it over to our experts for the evening. Just for those of you that may be new to our webinar series, this is sponsored by the Chehalis Basin Strategy, which is a network of partners who are hard at work to make the Chehalis Basin a safe and healthy and plentiful place to live for people, and as well as for fish and wildlife. The Chehalis Basin Strategy is administered by the Office of Chehalis Basin, which is the office that I direct, and that work is led by the Chehalis Basin Board, which is a group of community leaders as well as representatives from local, state, and tribal governments. The work that we do is supported and carried out by partners, including local nonprofit organizations, governments, and residents. We are working hard to create resources as well as implement on-the-ground projects to restore habitats and protect residents and businesses from flood damages. We are working to plan for large-scale and long-term solutions in the basin so that it continues to be a safe and healthy and abundant place to live for generations to come. Since 2012, the state and local partners that are working on the strategy have invested nearly $100 million to fund more than 100 projects that benefit both people and aquatic species. These include projects like what you're going to hear about tonight, the early flood warning system, as well as evacuation routes, flood protection measures for homes and businesses and critical infrastructure, farm protections, critter pads, farm pads that help safeguard livestock and farm equipment, as well as fish passage barrier corrections and other types of habitat restoration projects. You can see more about the projects that we invest in and implement on our website at ChehalisBasinStrategy.com. Tonight, you're going to learn much more about how to use and take advantage of the Chehalis River Basin Flood Authority's warning system. I'm going to hand it over to Scott Betcher here to talk to you a little bit about what is the Flood Authority. And before I do that, just to let you know that Scott is the staff to the Flood Authority, and he works hard to ensure that local perspectives and local considerations are included in the Chehalis Basin flood solutions that the strategy implements. Scott's a native Washingtonian, and he's a product of the Evergreen State College and has had a varied career throughout Washington State in the Department of Ecology, within the Washington State Senate, and as a private consultant for the last 15 years. He's been a great partner for the Chehalis Basin strategy. After we hear from Scott, he's going to turn it over to Dr. David Curtis. David Curtis, for the past 5 decades, has been on the leading edge of developing monitoring systems for water resources and flood risk management services. He's been involved in the design, development, and implementation of award-winning innovations in more than 50 automated environmental and flood monitoring systems across the United States and in 18 countries around the world, including most recently in Peru. So we're extremely fortunate to have him here tonight. In addition to leading the efforts in the Chehalis watershed's early warning system, Dr. Curtis also leads flood warning systems in California and Colorado. So we're going to hear from both of them tonight, and we're going to have a chance, as Casey mentioned, to take your questions specifically about how to sign up for and use the Chehalis River Basin early warning system, and any other questions that you might have about the Chehalis strategy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott to get us started on the presentations tonight.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. Next slide. So I'm going to just start here, and then I'll come back at the end, because I don't want to take too much time away from the main attraction, which is Dr. Curtis and his presentation about the flood warning system. But I do want to leave you with a few takeaways at the start here. The flood warning system is one of 2 things in particular that the Chehalis River Basin Flood Authority does. The first thing we do is local projects, and that will be perhaps a topic for a future webinar, so I'm not going to go into any detail about that tonight. But the flood warning system is a second sort of topical area that the Flood Authority invests considerable time and attention to. And a few takeaway points at the outset here. This really is your system. The flood warning system you're going to see is funded and has been originally funded by the state capital budget, but it's really maintained by the local governments in the basin. So the 3 counties and some of the cities, they pay the cost of maintaining this system. It's your system. And, you know, as such, we strongly encourage and invite all feedback. The system is only as good as the users who use it. We have a high number of people who use it. But like all systems, if we're not hearing about what's working, what's not working, how it could be improved, then it doesn't get better. And our goal is to ever incrementally improve this system. So your feedback is essential. And then the last takeaway at the start here is that, you know, this is an information system. It's intended to give you information. And that's really your best first line of defense in times of flood. Having early information makes you aware so you can be prepared. And so with those 3 takeaways, we'll turn it next to Dave, and he'll give you all the ins and outs of the flood warning system.
Thank you, Scott. And thanks everybody for joining us this evening to learn a little bit more about the flood warning system in your basin. Next slide, please. Flood preparedness is really a series of events that kind of repeat over and over again to be effective. Flood preparedness starts at the top of our little diagram here with a plan. And the plan includes the recognition of the flood hazard that you might be facing, where the flood hazard might occur, and when it might occur. As an event approaches your communities, you have to be able to recognize the threat. Once the threat is recognized, you want to be able to forecast in some fashion, get the dissemination or disseminate the information out to people that can actually respond to the event and take on the activities that would mitigate or reduce the kind of damages that would normally occur if you weren't prepared a little bit in advance of the impending flood. Once the flood peak passes, you're now into recovery mode. After that, you review what happened, figure out, okay, what happened, what worked, what didn't work, what can we do better? That's the reassessment part, and then reintroduce the update to the plan and start the process all over again. Next slide, please. Oh, excuse me. Before we advance the slide, the flood warning system really focuses on the three elements on the right-hand side. We want to be able to recognize the threat, forecast what's going to happen next, and then disseminate the information to the people who can use it. Next slide, please. So our objective to any flood warning system is to mitigate the risk. And we do that in two phases. We essentially try to reduce the amount of time that it takes to recognize that there's a serious event about to occur. With that information, then we try to increase the amount of time available to residents to respond to the flood threat. Next slide, please. So what we've done here is kind of overlaid the elements of flood preparedness on our little flood hydrograph here, the blue shaded area. And so we see planning, the flood threat recognition, response, and recovery, and planning in relation to a flood event. The flood warning system is designed to do a couple of things. Next slide, please. What we're trying to do is recognize the threat a little bit earlier in the game. That gives us a little bit more time to respond. So we want to maximize the amount of time available for the residents to respond to the incoming event. Gives you time to move property, protect yourselves personally for safety reasons, equipment, the animals, anything that might be threatened by the flood. Next slide, please. As you all well know, the basin has had a long history of both catastrophic and major flooding. We had some epic flooding in 2007 and 2009. And again in 2022, we had a series of events that culminated with some record and near record flooding, particularly in the middle of the basin. Next slide, please. One of the things that we have to be increasingly prepared for is the impact of climate change on the occurrence of extreme events. And the behavior of extreme events under climate change is kind of typified by this example, where in most of our history, big events were relatively rare. But with climate change, those events are becoming more frequent or even episodic. In other words, they repeat with higher frequency. Eventually, they become commonplace. So the flood warning system is a wonderful way for relatively fast adaptation to kind of the changing climate around us. And it gives us more information to be a little bit better prepared for the increasing frequency of the events that are going to occur in the future. Next slide. So after the 2007 and 2009 events, under the direction of the Flood Authority, the residents and stakeholders in the region were canvassed for what happened during the previous event, where are the gaps in information, and what can we do next? As a result of that, we commissioned, or the Flood Authority commissioned, the construction of 10 new sites that measured, 8 of them measured rainfall and temperature. 2 additional gauges measured rainfall, temperature, and stream flow. This number of gauges was specifically intended to fill gaps in the existing network of hydrometeorological stations in the region. And that means rain gauges, temperature gauges, stream gauges, weather stations that included wind, speed, and direction, humidity, and so on. So the important part of the system was it highly leveraged systems that were currently operated by other agencies, rather than duplicating effort and building something brand new completely by the Flood Authority. As a result, today we have over 300 sensors reporting to the Chehalis flood warning system from 100 different sites. So the system highly leveraged the existing infrastructure out there that continued to build over the past decade. Next slide, please. Here's an example of a gauge installation on bridges, or a bridge on the West Fork of the Satsuk River. It's very common for gauges throughout the basin to be located at or near a bridge location to measure stream flow. Next slide, please. We have rain gauges scattered in a roughly uniform fashion across the Chehalis Basin. Here's an example up in the forested areas. And you can see kind of its solar panel. There's to provide power. And you can see kind of a ragged look-at antenna pointing off at a 45-degree angle, and that communicates to the satellite, which relays information back to the ground. Next slide, please. So here's an example of the satellite. We have we have data coming from the Chehalis Basin. It gets beamed up to a satellite, which immediately transmits it back down to a receiving station in Wallops Island, Virginia. From there, the data goes by landline to an industrial strength server farm in Colorado, and it's immediately available to anybody with a internet-enabled device in the Chehalis Basin. So all of the data that you receive makes about a 50,000-mile trip before you actually see it, but it does it in a matter of seconds. Next slide, please. All the data is accessible through a publicly available website, and the address is www.chehalisriverflood.com. And here's what the landing page looks like. The homepage, and you have links to existing agencies like the National Weather Service for weather forecasts, river forecasts, and so on. We can show links to inundation maps, and so you can see if and when your neighborhood is going to be flooded potentially, and various other kinds of maps. So there's lots of things you can do, and we'll actually do a live demonstration to kind of walk you through how to take advantage of some of these features. Next slide, please. Here's an example of a data graph that you can use, and this actually shows rainfall from our Beeville gauge, which started last October, at least with this chart. And you can see the daily rainfall totals all the way through mid-January of 2022. During that period, nearly 90 inches of rain fell. And if you look closely, you can see that it rained, you had significant rain nearly every single day during that, roughly 4-month period, culminating in the appearance of a Category 4 out of 5 atmospheric river event in the first week of January. So you had several months of rain to saturate all the soils, and then a big rainfall event, which was the genesis of the flood. Next slide, please. You can also link to the National Weather Service and see river forecasts. At each one of the forecast locations in the basin, here are examples of 3. The heavy blue line is what's been observed up till now. There's a vertical dotted line that you can see toward the middle of each chart that represents the current time, and everything to the right of the current time on these forecast charts is the what the river is expected to do in the days ahead. Next slide, please. And here's an example of a data graph showing the Newaukum River levels near Chehalis. And you can see some horizontal lines across the chart. Starting with a yellow line, that indicates the levels of when we trigger a high water alert to send emails out to the various stakeholders. The next is the orange line, and that indicates flood stage. Generally considered the point where damage begins from a flood. A little bit higher, you see a red line, which is the indicator of moderate flooding, and the purple line is the indicator for major flooding with a lot of damage potential. And you can see that our flood in early January was a new record for the Newaukum River near Chehalis. Next slide, please. Another interesting little chart that's available to see is a cross-section of the river channel at these gauge locations where the forecasts are being made. As the rivers rise and fall, that dark blue area changes height. So it goes up and down with the rise and fall of the river stages. This happens to be at a time in January. The peak stage was at 190.1 feet. It occurred on January 7th at about 4:30 in the afternoon. And the yellow lines and the orange and red and purple lines are just like what we talked about in the previous slide, indicating our high water alert, minor flooding, major flooding, and or moderate flooding and major flooding. Next slide, please. We also have access to 3 different webcams. Here's a shot on the Chapman Farms area. They had some severe damage to the bank, and we installed webcams there to watch the restoration and bank stabilization process, and that it was occurring right in the middle of the flood event. So here is the flood actually occurring, so you can see visually how the flood was going as it was occurring. So just the visual representation is an important feature of the flood warning system. We've since moved that camera to the Wishkah River in Aberdeen. We have another one at the Montesano Water Treatment Plant and another one at the bridge in Centralia. Next slide, please. I've mentioned a couple of times high water alerts, and what we've done at each of 13 locations in the basin, set a stage that will initiate a transmission of an email to all of our subscribers for that particular site, indicating that water is rising and getting close to flood stage. So we have a mechanism for everybody to sign up for email alerts that's interested, and it's just a way to get a little bit more information at a specific location in the basin that may interest you, and provide additional time for you to respond. You can see a chart of indicating of how many people have signed up at each one of our locations. We have a 13th one available now that we just added. And the total of gauge signups is now up to about 1,700 since we made this chart. So kind of the distribution indicates kind of where the population is in the basin. The higher totals, around Chehalis and Centralia, where more people live. Next slide, please. One of the forecasting feature and the high water alerts are also important to people that might have farm pads. In the 2007-2009 events, farmers suffered severely from the high water, both in damage to their livestock, equipment, buildings, feedstocks, and so on. So one of the simple solutions was create an area, an elevated area that would rise above the potential flood elevations. where you could actually drive your livestock to these higher locations inside a fenced-in area and keep them above the floodwaters. You could do the same with equipment and the same with feed, for example. And again, the high water alerts help trigger when you need to respond and start moving your equipment to these safe areas. Next slide. And now we'll actually do a quick demonstration of the actual website itself, and then I will share my screen. And we will go to, let's see, here we go. I want to share. And with that, everybody should see the home page. Okay. All right, so the first thing you might see when you go to the homepage, and again, it's www.chehalisriver. or at www.chehalisriver.com, I should say. Don't be confused when you see a slightly different address here at the top. It's just the feature of the software package that we're using for this, so that we can get to it using ChehalisRiverFlood.com, but it actually shows a slightly different name, so don't be confused by that. So the first thing that you see is some important messages that might be of interest to you. For example, the first block message indicates training, and it's tonight's webinar. And we generally have a hot link to further information. So if you just click here, you would go to the link to give you more information and even register for the webinar training. You can sign up by for high water alerts by clicking in this message. And then another one that we frequently carry is a seasonal outlook for temperature and precipitation. And this is put out by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And it gives you a 3-month outlook for what is expected for temperature and precipitation. Is it going to be above normal, about normal, or below normal, for example, over the next few months? And scrolling down, you get back to our homepage again. And again, you can see these big icons go to, if I click on the weather forecast site, this will lead me directly to the Seattle Weather Service office. If we click on the rainfall forecast, we'll go to the Portland office of River Forecast Centers, and you can see daily forecasts of rain and temperature over the next 10 days. So you can see there's a little bit of rain coming in for today and tomorrow, and then a little bit more of a storm coming in over the weekend as these colors get darker and more severe. So it looks like you've got over the weekend a fairly significant atmospheric river event coming in, and you can see 2 to 4 to even 5 inches of rain perhaps in the area. Really important feature is inundation maps. And these are tied to National Weather Service forecast points. So if I want to click on one of these icons and go here for a map, get it centered right. And a baseline map or a background map comes up first. If the river at the indicated location is above flood stage, it'll start showing the level of water in terms of the amount of area that's inundated at that level. I can also go over and just mouse over different elevations to see what parts of my community might be underwater. So if I click on 144, which is major flooding, and I can actually pan and zoom and kind of zoom in and see, you know, where I am relative to roads or individual homes, for example. So it's a good mechanism to see, you know, how the river might spread out and threaten where you happen to live or work. Another little feature that you might want to know about is a current stage that's listed here is the current stage. But these little brackets on either side, if you click on them, you go forward in time and actually scroll through the entire National Weather Service river forecast for that location. So you can actually see the the expansion and contraction of the inundated area that's actually forecast. And then if you squint really hard, you can actually see a timestamp underneath it. So that changes, it goes about 6 hours at a time. And that you can tell exactly when that particular level of your inundation is actually forecast to occur. But I would encourage anybody to go to the site. It's meant for public use. There's a lot of information here. I mentioned, for example, going up to dashboards, and you can look at our webcams. And it's a little dark out, but I'm not sure what you're going to be able to see. Let's go down. Yeah, we can see at the Wishka River, there's enough light there. We can see what's going on, but you can see gauges, and you can actually see physically where the water is actually occurring. And then one other, let's see, you back up just a little bit. Okay. And we talked about atmospheric river events. And an atmospheric river is literally a river of water vapor in the atmosphere. And there's a lot of information available for this from the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes. And by going down, and we can just click on various things. And I will admit that a lot of information here is very technical, but one of the things that you'll commonly see these days is a reference to a category for an atmospheric river. I mentioned it earlier that you had a category 4 atmospheric river event earlier this year, and the categories go from 1 through 5. A category 1 is a relatively weak atmospheric river event. A category 5 is an exceptionally strong event. There's 2 gauges, or 2 kind of frames of reference. One is just how much water is being transported in the atmosphere to your territory, and for how many days it occurs. So typically they're 1, 2, or 3 day events. So if you have a lot of moisture coming in over 3 days, that might be a category 5. If there's a low amount of moisture in just a day or 2, that might be simply a category 1. So the weak and moderate level atmospheric rivers are generally beneficial. They're providing water that you need. The extreme and exceptional magnitudes are the ones that are dangerous. The water's coming in such volumes and such pace that you're typically going to have a dangerous flood. And as we mentioned, category 4 event occurred in January of this year. Kind of in the middle here, the category 3, it's kind of a mid-range event, and sometimes it might be dangerous in certain areas of the watershed. Otherwise, other times not so much. But that's the scale, I think, is an important term and feature to keep in mind as you listen to your local weather forecasters. Let's see, what do I think? Okay, well, let's move on to kind of the next phase, and let me get out of the demonstration and go back. I'll stop my screen share. And let's revert back, and I think Scott should be able to start again. There you go.
Great, Dave. Thank you. That was super informative and helpful. I wanted to share with you the use of the flood warning system. Dave shared with you, this is the January 22 event that we had. And on the left-hand side, you'll see a chart that's bounded in green with a tall spike in it. That was January 3, 4, 5 last year. That represents about 75,000 hits to the inundation map site for the flood warning system. We're really happy that that kind of usage occurred. If you went to the left of that tall spike, you can see, going back clearly to January 2013, that we really haven't had that kind of use because we haven't had that kind of an event. So we're really pleased that in January of 22, the system was used. And a real big shout out to really our partners at the Chronicle and Washington Emergency Management. They posted how to access the flood warning system on social media. And you can see kind of highlighted in yellow at the bottom of the blue box and the bottom of the orange box. This information was subsequently shared. So I said at the outset that this is your system. It really is a system to benefit everybody in the basin and people outside of the basin who care about people in the basin. Please share it. Please get the word out, because the more that can be aware, the more that we can all be prepared. Next slide. Following that event, we did a survey. We got about 50 people to respond. And I wanted to just share a few of the responses to the question of why did they sign up for email high water alerts? First one was in 2007, I was caught unaware in the flood, unaware. Second one, our house flooded in 96 and 07. We like to be prepared. The gauges and alerts give us more peace of mind. And then I highlighted this in yellow. Information equals peace of mind. I think that's a really powerful statement from this individual. Next one is, I'm a school superintendent. We have to decide on the safe passage of our students, using the flood warning system and the alerts. There is a piece in the flood warning system too about road closures and road openings, and knowing that people do need to travel in times of flood. Last one, to be informed and to ensure that tenants are aware of issues. So here is a person who's looking out for those he or she leases to. And then we had a question about the benefits of the inundation maps. And I thought that this was nice. They provide a visual representation of where problems are and are anticipated. The world of flood forecasting and hydrology, they talk a lot about stage and numerics, and that's can be very confusing. And so with the flood warning system and the inundation maps, we've tried to make them visual for people, so they have a sense of what 144 means or what 136 means. And so this person felt that the inundation maps were successful in that regard. Next slide. So as we wind towards closure here, we strongly encourage you, if you're interested, to go to www.chehalisriverflood.com, explore the system, sign up for the high water alerts. You can also visit the Chehalis Basin Strategy.com for all sorts of other downloads and guides to help you. And please feel free to pass that on to your friends, family, your networks. Flood insurance is always an option for people. And I should say we have a new resource that we just finished yesterday, where we've taken and translated into Spanish the sign up process for the high water alerts. So we really want to reach out to the communities whose primary language or first language is Spanish. And that will be available at the resource page here. And then tomorrow, we'll be presenting some of this information at Lewis County Emergency Management meeting, their annual flood meeting at 1 p.m. And then the Chehalis Basin Strategy folks are going to be hosting another webinar about flood risk and resources. So encourage you to sign up for that one as well. Next slide. So with this, I think we're going to turn it over to questions and answers, and we encourage anyone with questions to type them into the Q&A icon space at the bottom of your screen. And then my email address is there, scottb@sbgh-partners.com, for anyone who has questions afterwards. I'd be more than happy to answer and to help.
Thanks so much, Scott and Dave. While people take a minute to type some questions into the Q&A feature, I have a quick question for you, Dave. You mentioned that you have a new location where you've got I think number 13 in your system, where you've got another alert location. Where's the new location that you've just added? Oops, you're on mute there.
It's located at the China Creek Flood Control Structure. That was just put online this week, and there's already water accumulating behind the structure from a little bit of rain that you've had in the last couple of days.
Okay, so that's an area that people can sign up for also to get an alert from that one?
Yes.
Right. The other question I had that I think other people may have is how much notice do people get if they sign up for the email alerts that a flood is coming? You said you set a level of when you trigger the warning. How much time does that give somebody to know that a flood would be coming in their area?
Well, it's going to depend on how fast the water is coming up in any given location, but what we try to do is at least give people a few hours extra notice before the flood levels reach flood stage, if you will. In terms of feet or height of the river, in the upper parts of the basin, which may respond a little bit faster, we generally have set the high water alert level about 2 feet below what's considered flood stage. Where things move a little bit slower, like the Chehalis at Grand Mound or at Porter, would generally set it 1 foot below flood stage. It simply takes longer for the river to move at those stages, but that's so far been sufficient time for the users. But if we get feedback that people would like a little bit more time, that could be adjusted. We're experimenting internally with another feature that will allow us even more time, and that's to provide alerts based on those National Weather Service river forecasts that I showed. So if forecasting is not going to occur for 8, 10, 12, 24 hours or even longer, we can actually, we're experimenting with putting out a message saying, okay, in 16 hours, the flood stage will be reached at Grand Mound, for example.
Thanks. Casey, I know you're monitoring the questions that are coming in through the Q&A.
All right, we have a couple questions, but also before I want to get in the questions, give a couple more minutes. We're going to launch a poll, and you'll see that come through. So you can answer the poll questions, and then we'll also answer other questions. So one question we have coming in is, how does the data take king tides into account?
That's a Dave answer.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought that was one of the poll questions.
No.
I had trouble multitasking.
Well, we can give a moment for the poll to get answered, and then if you want to.
Okay. Well, the king tides are an important issue, and which was actually a problem this January. The Wishkah River gauge in Aberdeen, and where I showed a webcam where the two scales where you could see visually through the webcam. Those are intended to help with the king tide. We're still experimenting with how we want to do that because the tide comes up and down every single day. So there's a little bit of figuring out that we have to do to select the appropriate king or elevation to trigger an alert. We actually have one, and it's set on a high range because like I said, you get a high tide at least 2 times a day. So we have to be a little bit careful about crying wolf. So we're still kind of zooming in on that particular target. One of the things that we're also doing is developing a master plan for the flood warning system over the next 5 years. We've recognized, particularly after our experiences in January of this year, both with the flooding and with the king tide in Aberdeen and those surrounding areas, that we need to get better skill at forecasting the river below Porter, which is the tidally influenced portion of the basin. So that requires a different level of technology that's currently in use operationally. The technology exists to account for storm surges and king tides in combination with flooding coming downstream. And we want to work with the National Weather Service to make sure that we're moving in a direction that can improve the forecasting to account for king tides and other storm surges that might occur in the lower part of the basin.
Thank you, Dave. All right. Okay, so we have a question. Do local officials, local government, Department of Transportation workers, and first responders, so law enforcement and firefighters, have a joint communication plan with the Chehalis River Basin if high water alerts are issued, so that city officials and first responders know how to best direct the public? Let me know if you'd like me to repeat any of that.
No, I can take that one. We do not per se. However, the State Department of Transportation, emergency management at Lewis County, emergency management at Grace Harbor County, many public works directors are all signed up themselves to receive email high water alerts. So the alerts are making it into those local governments and into their systems and to their emergency management departments. But we do not have the kind of a formalized letter or plan that is asked for here in this question. But it's a good idea.
We do participate in annual meetings for preparedness before the rainy season, so that everybody's aware of the current features of the flood warning system and how to sign up for alerts or whatever information that they need.
Thank you. All right, we have a third question. Why is commercial building allowed in the floodplain?
Is that an Andrea question?
That's an Andrea question.
Well, I think the short answer to that question is that local governments are the regulating authority for making decisions about what building occurs in what parts of their jurisdictions. And that includes floodplains as well as floodways and outside of the floodplains. And each local jurisdiction has the ability to put restrictions or put building requirements in place to address what kind of building can occur where and under what circumstances. So the answer to that question is pretty multifaceted when it comes to where in particular you're asking the question. Different jurisdictions have different regulations around that. But all of the jurisdictions in the Chehalis and elsewhere use the available information that FEMA provides for where the existing floodplains and floodways are. Some of that data is more recent than others in different areas of the basin.
Thank you, Andrea. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to pop them into the question box. I'm going to throw out a second poll while we're waiting to give people a little bit more time. So feel free to put your answer into this second question, and we'll give a couple minutes. And at this time, I'll also be turning on the hand raise feature if anyone is not able to type in a question.
thought while we're letting people finish completing the poll and think about raising their hands, I had a question for, it sounds like you'll be participating in tomorrow night's or tomorrow afternoon's open house at the county. Is that something where other local government jurisdictions are participating too? Can you say a little bit more about what that event is?
Yeah, this is Lewis County has for many, many years had a annual meeting in October, November, right around now, to talk about flood preparedness for the upcoming flood season. And first responders come, Public Works comes, Lewis County Emergency Management comes, cities come, and it's intended to just get on everybody's radar screen that, okay, here we are again entering another flood season, and here's what's new, here's what resources are available. FEMA comes down, the Corps of Engineers comes down, National Weather Service comes and talks about the kinds of what the near-term forecast is and the long-term forecast. So it's just generally a kind of a heads up, and here we are again. Let's get ready because the season's coming. So it's a planning meeting, and the Chronicle newspaper is usually there. The public is invited and welcome to attend. The meeting would be posted, I think, on the Lewis County Emergency Management's page for anybody who's participating today. We could maybe after the meeting share the location and the announcement. I'll get that to Casey. So it's a good event. Last year it poured down rain, so it was perfect.
Thank you. We do have a couple more questions coming in.
Mhm.
Do each of the 3 counties share the cost equally for the flood warning systems described tonight?
So the cost is distributed between the 3 counties in a kind of a 2-part method. The first part is, how much of your county is in the Chehalis Basin. So Thurston County, for example, has a small piece of the Chehalis Basin compared to Lewis County or Grace Harbor County. So there's that to take into account. And then the second factor that comes into play is the amount of risk that a county faces. So insured risk, for example. So Lewis County has more insured risk than Grace Harbor County. And so at the end of the day, Lewis County pays, I think, about 67% of the annual maintenance cost, and Thurston County is like 8 or 9%, and Grace Harbor County is 22% or something of that sort. And so it's we went through quite a process many, many years ago to come up with a method that felt fair on the basis of ultimately how much risk was your county facing in the floodplain, and how much benefit would you get from this flood warning system. And in fact, the gauge alerts histogram that Dave showed you, it showed the highest number of gauges that people were signed up for were in the Chehalis, Centralia area. So that tells us where the usage comes from.
Great.
I hope
Thank
that
you.
helped. Mhm.
Thank you. And also just a reminder that want to throw it in that this meeting will be recorded, and we'll be providing the recording post meeting. But we do have one more question. Are there talks with WSDOT to replace Washington State Department of Transportation to replace the low portion of I-5 with a higher roadway or bridge near Centralia as an option for addressing future flooding?
That's an Andrea question. Answer.
I can jump in there to let you know that the Department of Transportation has looked at options related to potentially raising Interstate 5 higher than it currently exists. It's not on their current plan to do that, there's a lot of analysis that's gone into that in the past that we don't have time to really go into today. But I can tell you that they have looked at that option, and it's not currently on their plan to pursue that as an alternative.
Thank you, Andrea. I am not seeing any more questions.
Okay, so you mentioned the recordings, but I want to give a shout out to one of the recent webinars that you all offered on climate change a couple of weeks ago. I thought that was particularly well done, and if anybody on the webinar today has not seen that, that will be a good one to listen to.
Yes, and they will also be provided on the Chehalis Basin website and on a YouTube channel. We will provide information for that later.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that, and that's probably a good time to give a promotional shout out to the next webinar that we're going to be doing too. So the climate change one was the last one. Tonight's Be Prepared related to the early flood warning system. The next webinar that we're going to be hosting as part of the Chehalis Basin Strategy Series is on November 30th, and it is also related to flooding, but it's really geared toward providing information to residents and businesses about other things that they can do beyond the flood warning system to prepare themselves for flood season and to protect themselves against flooding. So we'll talk about some of the technical assistance that's available and other resources that you can use to help prepare yourselves and your families. That webinar on November 30th is going to be similar to this. It'll be an evening webinar, and you can find the registration link to it in the chat, and it'll also be something that we'll be sending out to folks that have signed up to receive our information about educational opportunities through the Chehalis.
Thank you, Andrea.
Any last questions, Casey, that you've seen or hands up?
Just a clarification on the date of the event at the Jester Auto Museum.
Tomorrow. That would be
That's tomorrow afternoon, right?
yeah, the
Yeah.
3rd.
I think that's it.
All right. Well, right on time. It's just after 7. I want to thank Dr. Curtis and Scott Betcher once again for preparing the presentations today. It's good to have such excellent subject matter experts to call on to help share the information about the early warning system. We really encourage any of you that were on listening tonight, if you haven't signed up, which it looks like many of you haven't, based on your answers to your first poll question, to go ahead and do that and spread the word to your friends and family. Thanks again for joining us this evening. Stay tuned for future upcoming events. And the last plug I'll put in is we want these to be useful and to cover topics that are of most interest to residents of the Chehalis Basin. So if you have ideas for other topics that the Chehalis Basin strategy is involved in related to aquatic species restoration and flood damage protection, please let us know. And we will look into adding those to our list of future webinar topics. With that, I'll wish everybody a good night. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.